Hello, this is Wade Frazier. This is February 15th, 2026, 9:14 a.m. So my previous post took Dennis's case in Ventura up till the time he was coerced, forced into taking a plea bargain that the courts didn't honor. And he can't get into prison. But this post is going to be more about my life now. And so in my life, especially the last year and a half of my days in my hometown of Ventura, California. And as I've discussed before, my day on the witness stand there in November 1988 was the greatest awakening moment of my life. And I would never see the world the same way again after that. Um, and But really, my awakening process began when I was 12, when my family changed its diet from processed food to whole food to save my father's health, which resulted in a health miracle. And that was really my first encounter with, let's say, the medical racket, which I'll get into much more later. I've discussed that quite a bit already. And I had my first paranormal experiences when I was 16, soon after spending the summer in Europe. And a couple years later, 3 years later, a desperate prick changed my studies from science to business. I had 8 years of idealism and disillusionment until I made my second desperate prayer, which led me straight into Dennis's company, literally about a week later. I still have a hard time believing that all happened, but it did. I lived it. I better believe it. And then my wild ride began. So everything up until meeting Dennis was just a prelude. And again, the year I met Dennis was actually my life's happiest year because I felt that I was really doing something important with my life, being involved in something that I was worthy. Then I became Dennis's partner less than a year after meeting him, and then it really accelerated. And again, we had a business that really started skyrocketing, and then we got swatted down, beginning with a raid, and horrific events soon followed, which eventually led to my day on the witness stand. And the month after my testimony was actually my life's worst month. But I soon got over it and decided I would do whatever I could to get Dennis out of jail and save his life. And I did. And I sacrificed my life, and it worked. And the greatest miracle ever witnessed, which Dennis and I and others figured was an act of divine intervention. And Gary Ween's advice to me was critical to my eternal gratitude. And Gary was one of my heroes. I still had terrible events ahead of me, which I still can't publicly discuss a lot of it. More people have to die. But when I got off the witness stand that day in November 1988, I was radicalized. I was awakened. And my days of study began soon thereafter to try to prepare to brief any extra witnesses that my legal fund could bring to the witness stand. And also, I don't think I studied it that much that year. As I look back, I don't think I was doing much studying before I left Ventura. But I did realize that whatever I was taught about the world growing up wasn't how the world worked. And so, yeah, that was the greatest lesson I had in my days with Dennis is, yeah, the world doesn't work how we taught that it is. Yeah, most of my education was a form of brainwashing. And that wasn't unusual. This is normal. So this is all societies do this. The United States is particularly good at it, brainwashing their citizens into, again, supporting elite interests. This is what Ed Herman's propaganda model is all about, et cetera. But my biggest surprise, so and this is now after I moved away from my hometown in 1990, I began my days of study. And what really, I think my biggest surprise, which in retrospect, I should have expected it, I guess. But I was still, there were still things I was naive about. And one of them is that as I just started discovering the depth of the lies that I was raised with, I found out that nobody around me wanted to hear it. And that was surprising. It's sort of like, so whatever the truth is, people didn't care. And this was like universal. People just didn't care about the truth, and they would all have their own sort of sacred beliefs, etc., which they embrace to their grave. In fact, I watched people embrace certain death rather than try to give up these beliefs they were brainwashed into. And so that was again, I saw this now after my days in Ventura, which anyway, that was a learning experience for me to realize how people basically sleepwalk through their lives. The lies they are told as children, they embrace them for the rest of their lives. And they will embrace certain death rather than rethink the things that think about the lies that they were really sold. And I've seen mystical reasons for this that make sense, in that most souls that are here on earth today have chosen to go through pain, not joy. And so they just go into one karmic catastrophe after the other because that's how their souls learn. There's better ways to learn than that, but apparently that's the choice that's been made on this planet by and large. I'm trying to change that game. We'll see how that goes. In early 1989, again, when I was trying to, bust Dennis out of jail, I was busy courting my wife and now beginning to dig out of my financial abyss and digging into library stacks. I was going to the UCSB and UCLA libraries, digging through their stacks, digging up patents and magazines and newspapers and stuff that were related to documentation of the stuff that I thought would see Dennis exonerated. And I got a job at a medical, and I've written about this. I got a job at a medical lab there. And in fact, in December, that worst month of my life, in December '88, I got a job at a medical lab. And the same week I began, federal investigators showed up. And over the next several months, they tried to put my employer out of business. So I got to witness the energy and medical rackets in action at the same time. And that was something to watch that. And I will get into that. I think I will be making posts, and I have a lot, but when I get into the medical record more, I'll get into more of the details of what the government media alliance had done. I think it was criminal. Again, this is what our systems are criminal. They're corrupt. They're corrupt to their core. And protecting the public is the biggest protection racket in the world, which is what I was learning. And that I was getting both barrels as I was getting it. I was being attacked by the energy and medical rackets at the same time. And I think my otherworldly friends were making sure that I got it. It was like they made sure there was going to be no way to try to wiggle off the hook of how corrupt it all is. And I think they were making sure I got the message. And again, in early '89, I first heard of Noam Chomsky from one of my roommates. And the next year, while driving to work, I heard an interview of the publisher of a new magazine titled Lies of Our Times, which it turned out that Ed Herman edited it and Noam contributed to it every month. And I subscribed to it later that year when I moved to Ohio. This is in late 90. I started subscribing to it, and that really began my media studies. So I knew the media lied, and then Ed and Noam, they were the guys who explained to me why they lied and how they lied. So that education was coming. I wasn't there yet when I was in Ventura. And from the time Dennis walked out of jail until the plea bargain, which was almost a year, just a little more than a year, I avoided Dennis by and large because he and Mr. Research were doing some dance with me in the middle. And neither one of them was telling me what the hell was going on. So I want to know part of it. So I avoided both of them for the next year. And by my example, I tried to gently dissuade Wayne from throwing in his going all in, helping Dennis to try to rebuild it. Yeah, by that time, I really had serious doubts that the businessman's approach to this would work. Again, not that Dennis didn't give it the best effort he could, but it's just Indiana Jones can't save the world by himself. So yeah, everything's too corrupt, and that's what I was really yeah. The businessman's approach attracts people of corrupt motivation. Yeah, so Dennis is in the business opportunities. Well, business opportunities attract people who are there to try to get rich, which is the exact wrong motivation for doing something like this, which is something that I had largely learned that. And and eventually got beaten into my head later, but I was pretty much there by the time I would busted Dennis out of jail. But Wayne went all in and it ruined him, bankrupted him, ruined his health, shortened his life. And his death in 2002 was the greatest single sorrow of my journey. It was devastating for me that happened to Wayne. And as I mentioned earlier, when we hit town in '87, I was 29, Wayne was 52, and he could play basketball with me competitively, and I'm amazed that he was able to do that at age 52. Yeah, I stopped playing basketball before I was 40, and yeah, Wayne was there, he was in his 50s, man, and he was competitive with me. I mean, it was yeah, I'm still awed by that. And the year before we hit town, actually, Wayne was a millionaire, and I've mentioned in the previous how he became a millionaire, and it was partly because he bought stock in A.L. Williams' company, but others, I'm sure there's other things he did to eventually build his fortune. So he was a millionaire. But the year before he hit town, he was involved in a real estate development deal, and one of the guys in the deal basically lied to Wayne. And he made misrepresentations on whether this land could be developed or not, and it cost Wayne $300,000 just because somebody lied to him. And Wayne, again, he raised $40,000 when we hit Ventura, which I don't know, maybe 10,000 was his, but he poured about another $250,000 into the whole Dennis affair, some number like that. And not to mention having people live in his home for years, including me. And now my wife and I was one of their peaceful interludes of living with them. But yeah, Wayne was a halfway house for Dennis's inmates. He he literally Dennis's wife and children lived with him for more than a year. Dennis was there for several months, and it strained Wayne's marriage, understandably. Um, I previously mentioned that Wayne actually had adult set on diabetes, but he was still an amazing physical specimen. In fact, he just injects himself with insulin every day, etc. And yeah, yeah, he was a stud. So about the time that Wayne tried to rebuild the organization with Dennis, in fact, they call it resurrection marketing with Dennis's typical humor. Um, Wayne got involved with a guy who was doing some alternative diabetes treatment, like still in kind of the R&D phase. And so in fact, Wayne used himself as a guinea pig from this stuff. In fact, the guy, anyway, it was how to say it. It might have worked if they'd have made it right, but there were times when they couldn't get the ingredients. So Wayne was injecting himself with something that wasn't the right stuff, and it affected his health. I remember he lost 20 pounds like in a couple of months. Um, I think he got off of that, but I think Wayne lost about $250,000 on that. So between getting lied to and Dennis and this thing, he went from being a millionaire to all he had left was his home, and he went bankrupt. And he was able to homestead and save his home, but yeah, from a millionaire to bankrupt in like 4 years. Yeah, and so from John Spickard, who was the financier of Dennis was in Seattle, to me to Wayne, all those financiers had their lives ruined. And it wasn't for a lack of effort on Dennis's part, but we realized we were taking on something. We were taking on the global elite. They saw us as a threat, so we got taken out repeatedly. Yeah, and so the $250,000 Wayne lost in the diabetes thing. I mean, he was kind of defrauded, and he was rolling some big dice, trying to get a big payoff. I think to keep funding Dennis's efforts, and so that was a risky play. So he lost it all there. Yeah, it was terrible for me to witness all that. So the year after, and Wayne was this again, a farmer from North Dakota, one of these strong, taciturn, the strong silent type, never complained about anything. But one day we talked on the phone when I was in Ohio, and he talked about his health problems because he started getting gangrene in his legs. And yeah, from being competitive basketball player to gangrene was like a 4-year journey for Wayne. And Wayne told me one day, he said, "Yeah, I think the stress, the stress of all that ordeal has definitely contributed to it. I'm sure it did." And Wayne's wife actually had her own health catastrophe. She was very sensitive to chemicals, and particularly like pesticides and stuff. Ventura was largely agricultural, so anyway, she was incapacitated. In fact, and then Orthodox medicine could do nothing for her. And so that's when she started exploring alternatives because Orthodox medicine totally failed to help her. And Wayne actually went to an alternative diabetes doctor who had diabetes himself. And when Wayne went to him, the doctor goes, "Well, you have gangrene in your legs right now, and you're going to lose your legs. So we can give you some some drugs and stuff that might slow the progress, but you're going to lose your legs now." That was the announcement. That was the pronouncement from even an alternative diabetes doctor. And so Wayne's wife, she was hip to a lot by that time. Yeah, in fact, what happened to us in Ventura is she saw the same thing happening to MDs, et cetera. And she was hip. So when the doctor pronounced the doom on Wayne's legs, she told Wayne, "We're going to Mexico." And so they went down to Mexico and got an alternative treatment. In fact, chelation therapy was part of it, and a goat. Yeah, anyway. And in a few weeks, the gangrene was completely reversed. And so, yeah, the impossible. And in fact, when Dennis went to back to see that doctor after his legs were healed, the doctor, his eyes bugged out of his head. He actually couldn't believe. I gotta pause just a second. So the alternative diabetes doctor, he couldn't believe his eyes. And it was a miracle. He's like, this is impossible. This is what just happened. You had gangrene and it's gone. That's impossible for that to happen. And he goes, "What in God's name happened?" And Wayne said, "Well, my wife and I went to Mexico." And as soon as he said Mexico, the doctor like shrieked and like put his head in it, and he ran out of the room, frightened. And this is because the medical racket, they tell Americans that all that goes down in Mexico for alternative stuff is just voodoo, doesn't work. And then this doctor actually saw the impossible in front of his eyes, and he actually ran out of the room shrieking rather than admit. Again, he saw the impossible and he couldn't believe it. And when he heard of Mexico, he literally was afraid of being, I don't know, the conditioning these doctors received. He actually ran out of the room shrieking and didn't come back. It was just like he was scared to death that actually people could be cured in Mexico. Yeah, it scared him. And I'm sure it was because of the wrath of the medical racket if he ever tried to do something like that. So, and Wayne died a decade later, and at his funeral, his widow told me that if she had not taken him to Mexico, Wayne would have spent the last decade of his life in a wheelchair, if he'd even lived that long. So yeah, so this was more of me. I'd already seen a number of instances of this of how the medical racket operates. And this is another event which shows the medical racket in all its wonderful colors and how doctors are actually afraid of treatments that work because they're not approved. Even though they're harmless, they work, they're cheap, but they're outlawed. This is how the racket works. All the rackets have a similar thing. And so that doctor's reaction was a typical MD reaction. And Wayne was also involved in one of the more heartbreaking events in Ventura for me. And this is a difficult subject, and it's something though I've seen it over and over and over again now, which is almost from the day that I began working for Dennis in Seattle, there were people I worked next to and stuff that were conspiring with the people who were trying to destroy or steal our company. And I saw again these kind of betrayals. I saw them early and often. early and often. And then when the employees cheered when Dennis's company was stolen there in Seattle, that was my first really big awakening moment with Dennis. And as I've written, only two people that I know of at the management level bowed out with honor in Seattle. Only a couple. The rest of them all, yeah, it was ugly. And I've written about this and discussed this. There were a few other people, a handful. There were a handful of other people below management that I was aware of. I interacted with some of them who were also good people who didn't join with the theft, this kind of thing, or join up with Bill Delp to try to wipe the company out, all this kind of crap. And I've written about the many attempts to steal our companies, how shocking it was after I saw several of these, several attempts. I told Dennis how shocking it was, and he just said, join the club. Um, and when Stan said that he and Mr. Research were going to work for Ken Hodgel, I mean, I didn't believe it at first, and then yeah, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe these guys could be that stupid and gullible to do something like that. And they both greatly regretted it, and that's where Stan, to his credit, for just soon before he died, he told Mr. Research that they were a couple of saps for being manipulated that easily. And so during my ride with Dennis, I continually saw people veer between naivete and paranoia. And when the naive get paranoid, they often lash out at everything around them. So it's like so they don't distinguish between the good guys and bad guys. They just think everybody's out to get them. I've seen this. In fact, I've taken the brunt of this, where they just lash out at everybody, thinking that somehow, yeah, they're unable to distinguish. And you can, to it again, back to Jesus, by the fruits you will know them, etc. But it's a thing where you can distinguish to a degree. You can distinguish the good guys from the bad guys by how they act. And but when the naive get paranoid, and paranoia is understandable when all this kind of stuff's going on, but when they start, anyway, they end up attacking the wrong people. I've seen this over and over again. I've been attacked. Yeah, same people sign out with Ken would attack me, and they literally lived to regret that. And so, and again, I had a hard time believing these people could be that naive and paranoid as to literally slit their own throats. Yeah, they literally let people like Ken slit their own throats for them. And it blew me away. Well, anyway, so I've written before, Dennis had an assistant. In fact, his name was Cab. And Cab was, again, Dennis's assistant when we really started taking off under Ventura. And Cab was a former sheriff's deputy. And in fact, in the post that's accompanying this, I actually linked to images. In fact, Cab and I talking in the parking lot of our facilities during the raid. And Cab and I, we became friends, and it was interesting. Now, Cab, when Dennis got arrested, well, Cab wasn't heroic, so he disappeared like everybody else did. But once Dennis got out of jail, but he didn't help the thieves, and he didn't help the prosecution. So believe it or not, that's in the good side. You didn't actively try to harm us. So he didn't. And then when Dennis got out of jail, Cab wrote an affidavit about his encounters with Mr. Deputy before the raid, and how Mr. Deputy was committing criminal acts before the raid. And so, yeah, so for me, Cab was, one of the good guys. And again, he wasn't heroic, but he wasn't a bad guy. And that was, in those days, not being a bad guy was actually pretty good. Yeah, Dennis had that minister salesman and a few others. I mean, between Wayne and I, his wife, Dennis's wife, we were in Ventura, and that sales guy, that was it. That was it for people really trying to help Dennis. But anyway, so when the coast was clear and Dennis got out, Cab came forward, wrote that affidavit about what Mr. Deputy had done. And I've discussed before that I was basically forced into drinking. I didn't get drunk to my 22nd birthday. And in fact, for 20 years, then I had a battle with the bottle, but it really didn't get bad until I was basically forced into drinking in my career in Los Angeles. Yeah, you're expected to attend 2 or 3 cocktail parties a week and stuff as part of your professional grooming. And everybody drank. That's forced into eating meat, drinking. Yeah, it was a lifestyle that was killing me. and it killed. I mean, literally, the accountants back, the guys who made partners and stuff, their life expectancies were like 60 years old and stuff. Literally, it's like I don't think I heard of one of them that made it to 70 years old. This is normal. It was such a terrible existence, terrible lifestyle in a worthless profession, and it took me years to understand that. And back then in the 80s, we'd go to lunch. And again, sometimes when the partner would come by, so that was a big deal when the partner would come out to spend the day with us in the field, the audit teams. And usually when the partner would come, or even the manager sometimes, the head manager, we'd go out to lunch and everybody drink. And we'd come back drunk, or a little buzz. You're supposed to, the real men and women, they don't learn how to hold their liquor better. But I remember going back to work kind of with a buzz, after a lunch where everybody drank. Yeah, that was normal in the 1980s. Really, I look back on a lot of practices back then, and I just shake my head in amazement that was normal back then. But I never drank on the job after that. In fact, when I had a drinking problem, it was always at night. So I'd go to sleep drunk. But Cab, he drank at work. So he had a van. He came in and he'd be in the parking lot. He'd go out to the van, smoke, have a little whiskey. And so, not great, obviously. Again, for those times, not super unusual, I would guess. I mean, not the best, but not the worst. Um, but that was known, and Wayne knew that. It was evident that Cab was doing that. And I can't speak to. I said Cab used to be a sheriff's deputy, and I can't speak to what drove him out of his career, but I think it was partly disenchantment, be my guess. Yeah, somehow he was going through his own cognitive dissonance, I think. Um, and I remember Cap telling me that the raid and the aftermath. I mean, he's watching this gangster activity by the sheriff deputies. That was kind of it for him. And Cap, that was his permanent souring on law enforcement. And actually, his father and Cap was. You see in the picture of me, it was a mixed race. It was African American and some Portuguese heritage. And in fact, his grandfather was like some one of the first black sheriffs or something in Southern California. So he had this heritage of law enforcement. So Bill Delp and Ken Hodja were contract agents who were sick on our company. But Mr. Deputy and friends and Miss Prosecutor, so they were just corrupt officials, okay, who were handsomely compensated for getting their hands bloody with our blood. And I never met Bill, but I watched Mr. Deputy play Boy Scout until he unmasked himself on the witness stand that day when I was on the witness stand. And Ken looked and acted like Mr. Rogers until he took his mask off and got his chainsaw out and started trying to kill everybody. And in my experience, again, the people that were sicked on us weren't former policemen. And I think that was, yeah, that wasn't good cover. Yeah, that was, and maybe that's you sometimes. It's some paradoxical thing. So a former policeman, well, of course, he wouldn't be working for the cops. But I don't. My experience is that those kind of people who are sicked on you weren't former policemen, etc. That wasn't what they did. But Wayne was pillar of community stuff, but Wayne was naive. And so Wayne always suspected that Cab was somehow a plant from the sheriff's department. And no, he wasn't, but it was Wayne. Again, if he didn't have any experience in these areas, I get it that he was like, well, he was a former sheriff's deputy. He must be part of it. Um, that was a naive idea. Yeah, it was a naive idea. And he didn't, how to say it, he didn't make his doubts known to Cab, but to us he did. He wasn't sure about that Cab guy. Well, Cab though, he was, after in fact, after Dennis gets out, Cab does the affidavit, etc. Cab was, again, of course, everybody's unemployed with their company being wiped out. So Cab, he didn't want to go back into law enforcement, but he decided he would go into security, private security. And at the local Ventura College there was an opening in the security department there. And Cab lived nearby, so it was an easy commute to go there. Easy job, really, being a security there. And Cab thought he'd be a shoo-in as using Wayne as a reference. So anyway, so yeah, Cap thought it was like a slam dunk that he'd be getting this job at security for Ventura College. Yeah. Again, Wayne was the most beloved professor there and stuff, had keys to buildings, etc. And so anyway, they asked Wayne. He literally asked Wayne, so what about this Cab guy? And Wayne goes, well, he shows up drunk, and all this kind of stuff. So Wayne shot him down. And Cab was shocked, you know. Yeah, really went sour. And when I heard this, I was heartbroken. Dennis was heartbroken. Yeah, Wayne was like, yeah, he was initially happy that he got the chance to do that, and it was to shoot Cab, and I was just like, oh Wayne. Uh, and Dennis, years later, when Dennis got out of prison, there, he tried to make it up to Cab's family, but Cab. And, oh, so Cab not only became a security, he wanted private security in LA, like me. You had to go to LA to get a real job. So Cab became private security down in LA, and he died in the line of duty. Yeah, he got, I think, shot to death while he was in private security a few years later. And I heard this, it was like, oh, that was just so painful to hear that. And Dennis tried to make it up to the widow, Cab's widow, one day, give her a dealership, etc. And she just hated us, you know. And okay, I got it that she hated us, but it was, you know, I was so sorry that Wayne did that. But again, he was naive and then naive and paranoid, and he thought that Cab was somehow part of it. So, and I've seen this repeatedly. Again, I've been attacked by people who would sign on with Ken Hodgel, and they'd be attacking me at the same time. It's like, yeah, it's like watching them get into a car with some stranger that dangles a candy bar out of the window, you know, and they just spurn their parents to go jump in the car for a candy bar. I saw this repeatedly, and yeah, it was like so dismaying for me to see that kind of thing. Anyway, so this Cab situation was particularly heartbreaking for me when I got out of that. Really heartbreaking. Um, but I also had compensation in those years, and my relationship with my future wife was the biggest part of that. So, and yeah, so we had it was they were actually good year. Once Dennis got busted out of jail the next year and a half. Well, actually, it was all good. So I got married in April of '90, and we moved to Ohio in September. And we lived, and it was just the two of us in Ohio for 6 years, which was one of the happiest times of my life. Those are wonderful years for me. Even though my career burned me out, I had another stress breakdown. That was like what was my fourth stress breakdown was then, and I'll get to that later. Um, yeah, corporate America just chews you up and spits you out. That's what they do. And accountants, yeah, this is normal. Normal that you get just totally burned out. Again, a shortened life being an accountant in corporate America. At low levels of responsibility. Yeah, it's just brutal way to make a living. Even though your hands don't get too dirty, you know, working in the fields, whatever. But it's yeah, they take it out of it takes it out of you. Um, and one of the things that was one of my compensations in those years was, and I've written about this. I'll discuss this more at a certain time. But again, I had my first paranormal experiences when I was 16, which radically changed my life's direction. Like I was ruined as a orthodox scientist before my career began. I said 5 years later, Brian O'Leary had the same experience doing the same exercise and ruined his scientific career because he couldn't drink the Kool-Aid of materialism any longer. Yeah, materialism is just a religion, a fake on a false foundation. Yeah, so there's far more than meets the eye happening in reality than what a materialist has to say about it. And when I drove, in fact, the first real channeled works that I was just, in fact, the only one I knew of back in the early 80s was the Seth material by Jane Roberts. And this was, and again, one of my close friends, still a friend, was a Silva mind control instructor. And we had our own spiritual groups together, etc. And um yeah, he was into it. Yeah, Seth was our guru back then. And and again, back to everything is corrupted in the world of scarcity. Everything eventually is corrupted. And why I bring that up is because when I chased Dennis out to Boston, I drove down to my hometown for a couple of weeks and got my car worked on with my father, and then visited my friends in Los Angeles, etc. And then drove out across the country. And while I was there, my Silva instructor friend said, because Jane Roberts had died in 1984, I believe. So this is 2 years earlier she had died. And I remember thinking, oh, that's the end of stuff like that. And I didn't know there was a whole body of literature, channel stuff that I didn't know about it at the time. Anyway, so I told my friend I'm coming down to see him, and he said, well, we're going to go see Seth. I was like, what? And anyway, some other guy was channeling Seth. And so we went there, and it was an evening, one night down in Los Angeles. Went down there and we watched, and we had went to a channeling session, the first one I ever went to. And then it was at a hotel. Like, I think it was a Roosevelt Hotel. I think the same hotel where Bobby Kennedy was murdered, I think. But anyway, so we go to this hotel and we're in some meeting room, and it was kind of odd. It was like, I don't know, 50 yards wide, but only like 20 yards long or something. Had like 3 rows of chairs, but there were like rows of, 20 or 30 chairs. So it was long and narrow, kind of a short and wide kind of room. And anyway, so this guy there's a guy who's going into a trance, and I've never seen channeling before. And this is when, in fact, on the way there that night, my car actually died on the highway. So my car was actually parked on the freeway. And I called, and somehow I was able to call my friend, and they came and picked me up off the freeway to take me down there. And the next day, I can't remember how I got home, but my father and I had to go down there and somehow survived not getting stripped, dead next to a freeway in Los Angeles. And we got it going and got it home. I remember it was highly stressful night for me even to be there. And so anyway, so Seth, this guy who channels Seth, he says, well, anybody has anything to say? And I immediately piped up, what am I going through? And so Seth and I proceeded to have about 5 minutes or so, maybe 10, but it was memorable. People, in fact, the channel's wife remember me years later, etc. That this was a memorable encounter between me and Seth. And it lasted, again, 5 minutes or something. Yeah, there was 100 people in the room or something. It was just me and him for the first 5 minutes of the session. And then he turned his head, and he was addressing, and I was on one end, and he has his back to me talking about someone on the other end. And I actually brought a tape recorder with me. I had it on the ground next to me. And literally, and it was an amazing experience for me talking to this channel for like 5 minutes or so. And as he turned his back and answered, talked to someone on the other side of the room, I remember sort of glancing down at my tape recorder, and I was wondering if it was still recording. It was just a Walkman that I put on recorder, which I'd never done before. And anyway, he has his back to me, and so I'm still kind of coming down from my interaction with him, and I glanced down at the recorder, but still trying to listen to what he's wrapped, But I'm glancing on it, so I all of a sudden I'm not paying attention to Seth, and I look down at my recorder. And I literally just start to move my hand like about this far. And in the middle of what he's saying to somebody with his back to me, he actually turns around and says, "Are we paying attention?" And I said, "No." And everybody laughs and stuff. Well, he read my mind. He read my mind, and he did it in a way, though, that was funny, enlightened me, I always believe that was his gift to me, because I was so genuine in my interaction with him a couple of minutes earlier that this was his interaction with me, that he was proving to me he was not just some guy up there acting on stage. And I attended about 50 more sessions again when came back to Ventura, I started going every couple of weeks. And this channel actually had channelings in his home. And there were about 20, 25 of us that would attend in his living room. And I did it for a couple of years, every other week. And he never did that again because he didn't need to. Yeah, he had proven himself to me within 10 minutes of me first meeting him, which was, again, just this gift. He gave me this gift, and it was a gift I've cherished ever since. Yeah, so channeling, etc., isn't just some guy up there acting or whatever, some make-believe stuff. It's either visitations from other dimensions. And during, again, I've attended at least 50 channel sessions, and that with psychic reading and stuff, it must probably close to 100. I haven't done one for many years, but I did a lot of it back then. And if you paid attention, once in a while you'd see stuff that was extraordinary. It was, again, you knew this wasn't just some guy on stage acting. And I had a few of those kind of events. And again, it wasn't, how I said, he wasn't trying to put on a show. It's just things would happen where you could tell that, okay, that is not, there's something otherworldly going on here. And I'll give some more examples here later on with other channels that I hung out with. I became friends with channels, etc. So, yeah, so those days I was into that quite a bit. It was great. It was wonderful. One of the compensations of my journey was doing that. And in the years subsequent to that, I really built my mystical library. It's one of the biggest, might be the biggest single section of my library today. And though in Southern California, I saw a lot of new age spiritual hucksterism going on. And I said everything is corrupted. So there are all these new age gurus with their harems and fleecing the flock and all this kind of disgusting stuff. And I saw a bunch of that. And in fact, the only time I've ever been ripped off mail order was by the Whole Life Expo down in Los Angeles. My wife and I were going to these kind of new age carnivals and conferences. And again, this is kind of like when I spoke earlier about Dennis speaking at the global science conferences in Colorado when Bill Delp sort of tried to ruin his appearance. There's all these side meetings and stuff. And so anyway, so my wife and I, future wife and I, we go. And this was, I believe, in 89. I think it was in 89. Anyway, they offered early, and in fact, there were some speakers who wanted to listen to go watch them speak, etc. And so the Whole Life Expo allowed you to early payment discount. So, and I got to pay like $150 to buy tickets for like some of these events, etc. And so they said, well, when you just identify yourself at the door, we'll have you on that list, and you can get in. Well, anyway, so the day arrives, my wife and I get there. We go to the front. We're trying to get in, and we said, yeah, my name is Wade. I'm on the list, and they go, you're not on the list. So no, so I had to pay out of my own pocket again for these tickets. And so after the expo was over, I contacted them with proof of payment, and proof of the tickets I had to buy because they somehow said they'd had it on record of me, even though I paid $150. And for a year, they gave me a runaround. They never paid me back. It was the only time I've ever been ripped off mail order. And they kept giving these fatuous excuses. Oh, we had a hard week or whatever. And I was like, yeah, it was. Anyway, so I got ripped off. And the only time mail order. So it's this whole thing of the spiritual stuff. Instead of a higher plane, it actually can be more corrupt than your normal business is. And so this is something that, again, a more demonstration of my journey's primary lesson of personal integrity is a world scarcest commodity. And they're still around. So they're still around doing conferences and stuff. So anyway, I consider them kind of a criminal organization. And it's just like, it's just a, scandal. These kind of organizations out there trying to lift everybody's vibration, and they act criminally. So, yeah, and people, and this happens a lot, people actually, and paranormal abilities they're real. Everybody's got them. But it's sort of how to say it. White male professionals, usually, if they don't use it, it kind of atrophies with them. Yeah, well, Brian O'Leary discovered that eventually. Yeah, white male professionals usually their paranormal abilities are usually quite atrophied. They can still be recovered, but white male professionals usually are the ones because they're so cerebral using that, whatever side of the brain it is, that is for rational thinking. They're kind of muscle bound in that way. Um, and there was another yeah, people who abuse those abilities, people who abuse their paranormal abilities to get paid, to get laid, this kind of stuff, they're setting themselves up for lifetimes of penance. And I may be speaking from experience on that matter because another professional channel that I befriended, actually, and I had sessions in her home, and she channeled an archangel, as I recall, among other entities. Um, yeah, they said that I actually helped melt Atlantis down in a previous life, and my soul had been in penance ever since, and that my soul had actually helped design the Earth School. And and how to say it, if you design the school, you better also be able to be you get to taste your own cooking. So anyway, I've been told that it actually seems to explain a lot of my journey. If it's true or not, I don't know. But actually, when I was told I'd help them out down in Atlantis, I remember when I was told that, all of a sudden I thought, oh, I think I was a female in that lifetime. So anyway, so I think I have some dim memory of it. I'm not sure is this Earth or this dimension. So again, those are big long stories. But this professional channel, I had some extraordinary events happen uh, in channeling sessions with that channel. And one time, I had a session, and the channel, and again, this is now, as I'm trying to recover from what happened in Ventura. And anyway, while channeling, the channel said that my spirit was sort of misaligned with my body or something like that. And so, which from what I've been through, it wasn't too surprising. And so, anyway, so the channel said, "Do we have your permission? We'd like to work on your light body, try to get you more aligned with, get your light body more aligned with you." I was like, "Oh, fine, sure." So I was sitting there, and I was sitting there, 10 feet away from this channel. And the next thing I know, and I had no framework to understand this, but now it was vertigo. So instantly I started having this vertigo and it felt like it felt like my head was I was like being twisted out of my body. So they're working on me. And so anyway, it was an amazing experience of having this vertigo. Like as soon as she says, "Yeah, we're going to work on you now." Yeah. So again, I've had many experiences like that, which again, it's like there's no way some self-styled step is going to explain it away. Sorry, too much of that. And in fact, in another session with that same channel, the channel said I had a strong agreement for basically a once in a lifetime event to have one, and it happened later the same day. And anyway, so this is yeah, so I've had many experiences like that to where I know that yeah, it ain't yeah. The materialists who try to explain it all away, they have no idea what they're talking about. If they're even honest about it, which most of them aren't. Or let's say many of them aren't, and I've seen that. Again, I'll get into this later. I've dealt with it, professional skeptics, organized skepticism a lot, and they're basically warriors for the establishment of materialism. What they are, yes, they're not. Yeah, they're not genuine in my opinion. They're again they're another kind of huckster. And Carl Sagan was sort of like their patron saint for a long time. So, in fact, I've had, and I'll get into this a bit. So I've dealt with space skeptics, and again, and been attacked by one of the leading Mr. Free Energy skeptic and stuff. And they're crooks. I've seen this. They're criminals. And they lie. And what amazes me though is how influential they are, how people just lap it up. And that's the thing that, and I'll get into this more in the future. And this is actually part of the problem with the free energy field too, is that these hucksters show up and they spew all their lies, and people have no discernment, like no ability to figure it out, and do their homework, etc. And they just and yeah, so the mudslinger always wins. And I saw this over and over and over again. People show up out of nowhere and start lying about Dennis, and everybody thinks that they somehow have some keen insight into the issue, and they just lie. And I know they, and I exposed the leading free energy skeptic who made a career out of attacking Dennis. I exposed him over and over his lies, and he'd make up new lies when I exposed his old lies. And so, yeah, this is criminality. So there's a lot of criminality in every. I said it's all over. So it's like, yeah, back to my journalist primary lesson: personal integrity is the world's scarcest commodity. Yeah, everything becomes corrupt in a world of scarcity and fear. Everything becomes corrupted, and I was seeing the same patterns repeat over and over and over. It became, the old. I used to be disgusted. Now I'm just amused. I've kind of gotten there with a lot of these kind of situations where I used to be like outraged and disgusted, and how could they do that? And came to realize this is normal. And eventually, I could laugh about it. So it's like I wouldn't want their afterlives, but it's the thing where this kind of stuff's normal. So yeah, New Age hucksterism and their harems and their cults, and yeah, I've seen it all. I saw so much of that by the time I was, again, by 30 years old. I'd seen so much of that kind of stuff. So before I married my wife, in fact, she was going to, she was getting her master's degree, and so she wanted to go to grad school to get her doctorate. And anyway, she was applying there in early 1990, and real estate was like, it was another one of the many real estate crazes in California. Anyway, so I actually had her sell her home before she actually realized found out she got into grad school. So, but it worked out. So she sold at the peak. She did get into grad school and moved away to Ohio later that year. I look back at it, man, I was rolling the dice. And anyway, in fact, the day after we got married, I moved our household into storage, and we lived at Wayne's place with his wife for that again. And we both left for the summer soon thereafter. We were there for a couple of months, I think, and then for a couple of weeks before we moved to Ohio, we were there. And so, and I was paying Wayne as much as I could afford to pay off Dennis's legal fund also. So yeah, I paid Wayne off over several years. It took a long time. Yeah, that was how to say it, when I became when I did that, it took that's legal. I knew I was throwing my life away, and I did. Yeah. So owning my own home, having a family, all kind of stuff, wasn't in the cards for this lifetime. That was a choice and I knew I was making that choice when I did that, and it turned out that way. I can't regret it. So yeah, but it was part of the price of the journey. Um, And actually, the medical lab, I actually gave him like 2 months notice. And then again, I quit there in June of 1990. And that was only one of 2 times in my career that I voluntarily left a job. All the rest were involuntaries. And this in corporate America, this is also normal. Yeah, getting fired was like, that's corporate America. Yeah. So he's trying to survive it. That summer though, so the summer of 1990, I was either playing with my wife. She was living with her parents there near Lake Tahoe, and it was a wonder. I spent months at their home over the years, and that was wonderful. And I was also hiking in the Cascade Range with my cousin that summer, and so that was a good summer. But I had a few other terrible events happen. Yeah, and I can't really talk about it all right now. More people will have to die, but there were a bunch of terrible events that were still happening in my life. Yeah, I have no contact with my immediate family. Um, and it was, yeah, it was, and I had relationships I thought would survive anything. And again, I love my friends. I guess that's why, I gave stock to my friends who couldn't invest, etc. I just want us all to, good shit lollipop. And I had relationships that I thought would survive anything, and they crumbled during my ride with Dennis. Yeah, I lost many friendships, etc. And again, I just weren't that strong. However, though, I found out who my friends really were, and so I have friends are like gold nuggets to me because of that. And so, on balance, I guess I came out ahead. The pain of so many ended relationships was very painful, but the people that survived it, yeah, they're my buds, my close buds, friends for life stuff. And I have no contact with my immediate family. I haven't since 2013. No contact with my immediate family, and don't want any. And again, this is part of the fallout. part of my journey. Yeah, this is part of following my journey. And so yeah, personal scarcity, personal integrity is the world's scarcest commodity, but it's also the most precious. And if an effort like mine will succeed, people have to have a minimum level of integrity to get there. And I don't ask people to be heroes like Wayne and Dennis and me. I don't ask for that. I just ask people to learn how to sing the song of abundance and be willing to give up. And usually, and I've said before, the people I'm looking for already have to be carried and awake, back to disillusioned idealists. And so all I can do is help them in that journey of developing a comprehensive perspective. And the first step is jettisoning all the lies that we're raised with. And anybody who's really woken up gets that. But I'm here to help them see how deep it is and how universal it is. It's not just in one or two areas. So the area they found out where it was lied, whether it was the CIA or the medical racket or whatever, it's like that everywhere. That's the generalization that they need to learn to be a productive member of what I'm doing. And there aren't many of them. So the problem is, I think my curriculum is worthy of their attention, but finding those people is the hard part. That's the hard part for what I'm doing, finding those kind of people, because there are very few of them. And so September of 1990, we loaded our household in a moving van. I towed my Pinto wagon behind it. My wife drove behind me in her car all the way to Ohio, where we began our newlywed lives. And we spent 6 years there, which were great years. They were great years for us. I really began going deep in my studies, though. So again, my radicalized perspective, which has yet to end. And those days of study, that's coming next. But I will relate one story that I learned. A couple years after Dennis got, forced into this plea bargain, about the same month, I think, that Dennis was kangarooed into prison. PC Magazine, which is something I subscribed to back then, had a story about how in Los Angeles were criminals who were bilking readers of computer magazines and newspapers out of millions of dollars for orders for computers that were never delivered. Yeah, so there's these. In fact, PC Magazine said they had the same ads. So these criminals would actually put an ad in a magazine or a newspaper, and they said, "Yeah, cheap computers here." And it'd be like, it wouldn't be ridiculously cheap, but it'd be like maybe a 20% or 30% cheaper than anything they'd find anywhere else. And people would mail them the money, for the cheap computer, and it wouldn't come. They just take the money and run. And they were setting up company after company to do this. They would set up a company, take in like $1 million for these orders, and then fold the company and disappear. And they were creating one company after another. And PC Magazine they did an investigation because their readers were getting scammed. And the whole story was about, and these guys were in LA. In fact, one of the operations they had at the same time Dennis was arrested in LA, they had an operation like within a mile of where Dennis was arrested, with the spectacular arrest by Mr. Deputy and friends. And these guys just took the money and ran. It wasn't even debate here. There was this criminal behavior where they were taking deposits for computers they never delivered, and then they folded the company and started another company and do the same thing. Yeah, it was like maybe $10 million or something that they had stolen from the public, some number like that. And PC Magazine actually did their own investigation of this, and they actually had these guys. They had identified them, etc., and they couldn't find any law enforcement jurisdiction in the United States that was willing to even go after them. Federal, state, county, city, nobody would touch them. These guys were just stealing millions of dollars from the public, and the officials, all of them, just stood around and watched. That's real law enforcement in the United States. Yeah, so law enforcement in the United States is a joke. These criminals had no defense, and no law enforcement jurisdiction in the United States would touch them. And these guys contacted everybody they could, and everybody had an excuse for why they wouldn't prosecute these guys who were stealing millions of dollars from the public blatantly. But they sure could throw Dennis in prison for not filing a form. So law enforcement in the United States is a joke. It's mostly used as a weapon to wipe people like us out and serve the elite interests. Protecting the public is not really the function of law enforcement. Not really. It's protecting the turf of vested interests in the world's largest protection racket, which is protecting the public. Yeah, it's the largest protection racket in the world. Well, soon before I left Ventura, I interviewed the rocket scientist who was the greatest champion of my mentor's engine. I interviewed him. I was looking for documentation that I thought he was privy to. Again, it was a federal study of his best engines in the world, et cetera. It was apparently read into the congressional record. I was hunting for that stuff for my later writings. And then I had an extraordinary encounter with the man I'm going to call Mr. Advisor. And this was really soon before I took the summer off there in Ventura. And he took me aside one day. And this guy was an international big shot and expert in electricity, this kind of stuff. And anyway, he told me about meeting with the guy because he had been contacted by the International Tesla Society because of his association with me and Dennis, etc. The International Tesla Society contacted him and had him visit free energy inventors. And I heard he visited Troy. What's his name? Troy Reed, I think. But the one he told me about though was a guy who had is an old guy. And this is how it was told to me. He said there was this old guy who had again, he visited the guy, and he was an old guy, and his wife had Alzheimer's, and this is this old guy, and he had some gizmo, some free energy gizmo, and in fact, this old guy, and he had a partner, and anyway, they had heard of my Mr. Advisor by reputation. They actually asked him to become their partner. And after what just happened in Ventura, he was not interested in that. But he decided to meet with them. And so he met with them. And anyway, this guy showed him his device. And it was about this big. And it had wires going into it, et cetera. And anyway, so this guy goes, this is my deal. In fact, the guy had written a book, which he actually lent to Mr. Advisor that explained the physics behind why it did work. And he told me how my Mr. Advisor told me how impressed he was with the book and the mathematics. He thought the mathematics was particularly beautiful. I think the Boolean algebra, as I recall, I thought was really slick. Anyway, he had this device, and it started chugging along. And then this old guy said, "Well, watch this." And he took a wire and he plugged it. He took a wire and plugged it into something else. And Mr. Advisor said it should have shorted out. What he did, it should have shorted it out. But when he plugged that wire in like that, though, instead of shorting out, this thing all of a sudden went into overdrive, started cranking out energy, and ice formed on it as it was cranking out energy. And I'll never forget the awe in that man's voice as he described watching this work. And the inventor was kind of like going, why does this work? This is a miracle. This thing was working. And so anyway, so this guy was telling, and again, after Mr. Advisor turned down the offer to become this guy's partner, he started talking about what he had been through. And so apparently a couple years earlier, he made working prototypes of this, and he mailed it off to the big energy institutions, thinking that he would get a ticker tape parade, for solving the world's energy problems, etc. And the opposite happened. Not only did he never get any acknowledgement, so it's like they all went into a black hole somewhere, all the stuff he mailed out. His harassment began then. And Mr. Advisor was telling me about some of the harassment. It was like this guy would have some deal put together with some bankers, and the next day the bankers would treat him like he had the plague, this kind of stuff. So he was getting deals, they were getting wiped out, etc. This is a very familiar sounding story for me. Anyway, so it was the first time I really heard about free energy tech like that, 0 point energy. First time I ever heard about it. I heard about Joe Newman a couple of months after becoming Dennis's, working for Dennis, but it was sort of a little more cryptic with Joe. In fact, as I discussed later, I've discussed before, Joe thought he was a second coming, which is a typical delusion of free energy inventors. And what was I doing with that? anyway, Sparky had hell to pay. No, I said no, Sparky. So it was actually Sparky Sweet. I did not, Mr. Advisor did not tell me who it was, when it was, where it was, but he described this. And a year later, I met Brian O'Leary, and within 5 minutes of meeting Brian, Brian gave me the name of this guy, Sparky Sweet. And I didn't learn for another 20 years later that Sparky lived right down the road from us there, and he lived in the San Fernando Valley. So anyway, so Sparky was very aware of what was going on as his Ventura. He had a front row seat, and he was horrified by what they had done to Dennis. And in fact, it informed his efforts watching us get just annihilated by the gangster officials. And so anyway, and so Sparky, yeah. So I said I didn't hear Sparky's name till a year later. In fact, I forgot it, and it wasn't until 2001 that I asked Brian what happened to that old guy, and I heard about Sparky's grim end, which I'll discuss in a future post. But anyway, so when I just before I left Ventura, I heard of a legitimate free energy device for the first time, and I heard what the inventor was going through. And this was by that time it wasn't a surprise what he was going through, and but this was one of my first encounter with somebody who really had the goods. Yeah, we were trying to pursue in Ventura was arguably would work, but um, it was still kind of maybe could have sort of kind of thing, right? It was still in the realm of theory to it, even though we're trying to build it when we got wiped out and test. We were doing the research on it. But Sparky actually had invented the real McCoy. Not the only guy, but he invented a free energy device and tried to bring it to the world. And it was hounded to a grim end. In fact, he was probably murdered. And then again, I'll get into this later. In fact, when he died, they confiscated. Some people came to his house and confiscated all his equipment and materials and everything else. And this is again another normal story, but it was one that I had heard again just before I left my hometown in Ventura back in 1990. To my knowledge, the effort in Ventura was the last significant effort ever made in North America around that heat pump. That was the last time it was ever. Yeah, the heat pump's been totally wiped out in North America. And as I've in my post, I linked to it, but there's a company in Portugal that actually still makes them. But it's the only company in the world that I know of that actually still builds the Dennis' style of heat pump with the big flat plate evaporator. And it gets 85% savings over other heating systems. Yeah, again, it's the best heating system in the world. Still is. And it's been wiped out completely in North America. And that's not, again, that's the mundane stuff. The suppression of the other exotic technology, free energy, Sparky stuff, and so many inventors, thousands of them, have been wiped out, bought out, etc. This is something I'd still learn. But hearing about a fellow traveler who went through hell there just before I left Ventura with an undeniably impressive device, that was the first time I'd heard something about that. So that was like another reality moment for me. Like, hey, we weren't chasing phantoms, we were chasing something that was really real, which became very evident in the years to follow. And that'll come up in future posts. And as I've said, it's like if I had not met Dennis and had my ride with him, that first ride from 1986 to 1990, I don't think I'd have much worse saying, because I'd be naive still. I wouldn't have been awakened yet. And so, yeah, so I have to, in a way, be grateful. Yeah, I can't regret anything. I can't regret that journey. It was incredibly brutal. I suffered much worse than I've actually disclosed publicly so far. But I don't think I can regret it because it woke me up. I wouldn't be doing the work I do today if that had not happened. So it was the greatest learning experience of my life. Yeah, everything since 1990 with all my work and my studies and stuff's been the small stuff. All my life's greatest lessons were learned by the time I was, and by the time I was 30 years old, I learned my lifetime's greatest lessons. And the rest of it's been kind of the small stuff, which is, again, but a comprehensive perspective takes, the radicalization was, again, back to disillusioned idealists. So the radicalization helps. Just a second. So as I was saying, yeah, so awakening. I said, so people I'm looking for, I call them disillusioned idealists because they have the two qualities I'm looking for, which is they cared and they woke up. And I can't help people care or wake up. people have to come to me that way. Again, as this is an idealist. And they exist. So I really do think there are enough of those people in the world that can do this. And again, and energy is a big leverage point. Everything else is a distant second place. Everything else that's going on the planet today is a distant second place to that. And the technologies to to create a world of abundance, in which I call the fifth epoch, those technologies are older than I am. And the encounter with Sparky that Mr. Advisor had, that was my first encounter with that these technologies are real. It's not just some phantom, a figment of people's imagination, whatever. This stuff's real. And I would later learn how real it was, because one of my close associates was kidnapped and demonstrated these technologies several years later. Anti-gravity, free energy, I mean, mind-boggling technologies. And so the so-called conspiracy theories in these areas are largely true. Again, I don't trust any insider that says they were part of it, but in fact, all the information that I have on this, that the good stuff, it wasn't from insiders. It was from people who got kidnapped and shown this stuff, or stuff like what Sparky went through, or stuff like what Brian went through. Yeah, it wasn't, some talking head saying, "Oh yeah, I was an insider, and let me tell you all this great stuff." In fact, I don't trust any of those people. So, and some of them may be right, but I'll guarantee you that a lot of those people that are doing that are fakes, either professional fakes. They're working on behalf of the global elite, or they're just attention seekers or this kind of stuff. So, but yeah, but I encountered a bunch of the real McCoys eventually in my journey. So that is all I have for now. So